Recording. So I'm using ChatGPT Plus here. I'm targeting the GPT-4 model, and as I mentioned in the article here, I've started with my first prompt. So what I'm going to show you here is that ChatGPT came back and gave me some context. It showed me that it understood what I was asking it. So it's a component that makes an API request to the OpenAI chat API and displays a response on the screen. It's given me some, installation instructions for Axios. It's told me to create a new file. And if I was to scroll down here, you can see it's given me a whole heap of code. I understand this code. It's importing state. It's getting Axios. It's creating a component. It's handling the submit event. And then it's giving me the send query. And it's also giving me the basic bit of information that I need to collect from the end user. So it's giving me a div, a form, ask a question text, and so on. It then tells me to replace the API key with your actual OpenAI API key. That's a mouthful. And it tells me to then import the chat component into my desired Next.js page, for example, the root index page under pages. For those of you that know Next.js, the folder pages and index is essentially your kind of main homepage component. It's the root of your application. It shows you how to import it here. It's got beautiful syntax highlighting. It tells you what language, and it's got a really nice little copy code model here. And it ultimately tries to summarize what it is it's given you. So when visiting the homepage, you should see an input field asking a question. Now, as I mentioned before, I wanted to try and do native. I didn't really want to rely on Axios. And the reason I determined that was when I was looking at what Axios is, I didn't know what that library is. I don't know what it does. And I did a bit of Googling and read a number of articles that talk about how Axios is a Node.js library for HTTP client request handling and other things. But Next.js had built-in handling for this. So I simply asked it, do you need to use Axios for this? Remember, you can be really natural language with the chat models, and especially through ChatGPT itself. So it then comes back in a nice friendly manner and says, no, you don't necessarily need to use Axios. You can use the built-in fetch function available in modern browsers. Here's an updated version of the chat component using fetch. So it obviously knew what I was looking for. That's the power of the AI model. It's reading the kind of behind the scenes of my wording. Do you need? And it could just say no and then not give me the code sample, but it did. So it rewrote the code. It just streamlined everything here. You can see that it's modeled out a number of the API items here. You can see it's given me the URL. And one of the things that was really interesting about this is what I did is I said, actually, can you rewrite the code so that it doesn't take a user input? Instead, it uses a hard-coded string that I can replace later with variables from the session. If you remember my use case, I'm not asking the customer or the end user what blog articles they want. I'm going to scrape information from their profile, and then I'm going to suggest it. So what I was then able to do is it sort of spat out, it said, certainly, here's the updated version of your chat component JS file without the user input. Instead, it uses a hard-coded string that you can later replace with session variables. Now, if you have a look at some of the nuancing of the AI there, arguably this text here where it says instead it uses a hard-coded string that you can later replace with session variables, it's sort of taken my wording and just reframed it back to me and said hard-coded string I can later replace with variables from the session, and it's saying you can later replace with session variables. So I'm not sure whether the AI model is just simply correcting my English, which is very easy to do, or whether it's actually understood the depth of context. I suspect it's probably both, and I don't think the AI model is trying to, upset me. But let's have a look at the code. So you can see here that it's created hard-coded input. It's also giving me some comment here that says replace this string with your session variable later, so that's nice. And then it's just essentially refactored this to include the hard-coded input. It's put some nice error handling in there, which is really quite clever. And you can see that it's given me the API key and everything here. So in this version of the hard-coded input, the variable holds the hard-coded string, yada, yada, yada. The rest of the code remains the same. So at this point, I was ready to put it into my application, and I'll talk about what happened there in the next video.